Nobody voted for this. There was no announcement, no emergency speech, no warning label. But one quiet deal changed what saving money would mean for the rest of your life. For most of modern history, saving money was a virtue. You worked, you earned, you saved, and time did the rest. Interest rewarded patience. Stability protected discipline. The system favored people who delayed gratification. But somewhere along the way, that contract broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. This is the story of the deal that kept the financial system alive and quietly transferred the cost to savers. The old promise: in the decades after World War II, the financial system ran on a simple moral logic. If you saved money, the system respected you. Bank deposits earned interest above inflation. Pensions promised predictable futures. Government bonds were considered risk-free in real terms, not just name. This wasn't generosity, it was structure. Savings were necessary because capital formation depended on them. Banks needed deposits. Governments needed long-term lenders. Businesses needed patient capital. Savers were not a side effect of the system. They were the foundation. And for a long time, that foundation worked. The problem nobody liked talking about. By the late 20th century, a structural problem emerged. Governments promised more than they could fund. Corporations borrowed more than growth could justify. Households took on debt assuming stability would never end. The system became dependent on continuous expansion. But expansion requires flexibility, and savers represent rigidity. Savings demand preservation of value. Debt demands erosion of value. These two forces cannot coexist forever, so a choice had to be made. The moment of decision. The turning point didn't happen in 1 year. It happened gradually across crises. 1970s inflation shocks, 1987 market crash, 1998 LTCM collapse, 2001 dot-com bust, 2008 financial crisis. Each event forced the same question: should the system allow painful correction or quietly change the rules? Every time, the answer leaned the same way: protect the system first. The quiet dealt. The deal was never written down, but its terms became clear. Interest rates would stay artificially low, inflation would be tolerated, then normalized, asset prices would be supported, debt would be rolled forward indefinitely, and in exchange, the system would remain functional. Banks wouldn't fail openly, governments wouldn't default explicitly, markets wouldn't collapse uncontrollably. The cost? Savers would no longer be protected. Why savers were chosen? This wasn't cruelty, it was math. Savers are silent. They don't strike, they don't default, they don't collapse overnight. They lose slowly, a little purchasing power each year, a little real value each decade, enough that the pain feels personal, not systemic. That makes savers the perfect shock absorber. The mechanism. How the deal works. The deal operates through three main channels. 1. Interest rate. Suppression. When central banks hold rates below inflation, debtors benefit, governments refinance cheaply, asset prices inflate, but savers earn negative real returns. Your account balance may rise, but what it buys shrinks. This is not an accident. It is policy. 2. Inflation. Reframing inflation stopped being described as loss. It became transitory, manageable, necessary. Instead of admitting erosion, the system reframed it as lubrication. A little inflation, they said, keeps the wheels turning. For savers, it keeps value leaking. 3. Asset channel favoritism. The system stopped rewarding saving cash. It began rewarding owning assets, stocks, real estate, anything that inflates with policy. If you saved in dollars, you lost. If you borrowed to buy assets, you won. That was not coincidence. It was alignment. The moral shift. This deal quietly changed the moral center of finance. Patience stopped being rewarded. Leverage became intelligent. Caution became costly. Saving money was no longer conservative. It was dangerous. Why nobody announced it? Because announcing it would break trust. Imagine a government saying, "We will protect borrowers and institutions, even if it means your savings lose value." That would cause panic. So instead, the deal was implemented through technical language, policy tools, emergency measures, temporary programs that never ended. Complexity replaced honesty. The savers' confusion. Most savers don't understand what happened. They just feel it. Their money doesn't stretch like it used to. Retirement projections keep moving. Security feels fragile. And the advice they receive sounds absurd. Take more risk. Invest aggressively. Don't sit in cash. The system that once rewarded caution now punishes it. The historical parallel. This isn't new. History shows the same pattern repeatedly. When states accumulate unpayable obligations, they don't confiscate savings outright. They dilute them. Rome clipped coins. France inflated assignats. Britain used financial repression after W. Du Bois. The method changes, the outcome doesn't. Savers pay, quietly. Why this deal still holds? Because the alternative is worse. If interest rates normalized overnight, government debt servicing would explode asset prices, would crash pension assumptions, would fail. The system survives by not allowing reality to surface all at once, and savers make that delay possible. The psychological cost. This deal doesn't just affect money, it affects behavior. People stop trusting institutions. They chase speculation. They feel forced into risk. The system becomes unstable, not because people panic, but because they adapt. And adaptation changes everything. Where this leads, every quiet deal has a lifespan. It works until confidence erodes faster than policy can manage. The question is not whether the cost will surface. The question is who pays next. When the deal became the default once, the system learned that sacrificing savers could stabilize everything else. The deal stopped being temporary. It became standard operating procedure. Every crisis reinforced it. When markets trembled, rates were cut. When debt grew, inflation was tolerated. When asset prices wobbled, liquidity arrived. Each intervention carried the same hidden cost, the quiet erosion of savings. And each time, the system survived. That survival was taken as proof that the strategy worked. The transformation of saving over time. Saving stopped meaning what it used to mean. Saving was no longer about preservation. It became a transitional state, something you held briefly before converting into risk. Cash became dead money. Safety became inefficient. The cultural message shifted. If your money isn't growing, it's failing. That belief did not come from individuals. It was engineered by incentives. When real interest rates remain negative long enough, behavior follows. People don't abandon saving because they're reckless. They abandon it because the system punishes it. How the deal reshaped society. The consequences extended far beyond finance. Generational divides widened. Those who owned assets before the deal benefited enormously. Those who came later faced inflated prices and limited access. Housing stopped being shelter first and investment second. Education became debt-financed necessity. Retirement became market dependent. The deal didn't just redistribute wealth, it redistributed certainty. Why this never triggered. Revolt historically, systems collapse when pain is concentrated. This deal ensured pain was dispersed. A little loss each year, a little adjustment each decade. Enough discomfort to feel stress, not enough to unify resistance. Savers blamed themselves. I should have invested earlier. I didn't take enough risk. I should have known better. The system escaped blame because the loss felt personal. That's the most effective kind of transfer. The role of central bank language. Notice how language evolved. Inflation wasn't described as confiscation. It was described as stimulus. Low rates weren't called repression. They were called accommodation. Emergency tools weren't labeled permanent. They were called temporary, even when they lasted decades. Language created distance between cause and effect, and distance dissolves accountability. The illusion of choice? The system presents savers with options, stocks, real estate, funds, speculation. But these aren't true choices. They're forced adaptations. When the safest option guarantees loss, risk becomes mandatory. This is why modern finance feels aggressive. Not because people are greedy, but because stability has been priced out. The deeper consequence, trust. The most damaging effect of the deal isn't financial, it's psychological. Trust in money weakens. Trust in institutions erodes. Trust in the future fades. People stop believing long-term promises. They plan shorter. They move faster. They extract value now. That behavior feeds instability, the very thing the deal was designed to prevent. Why the deal can't be undone easily? At this point, reversing the deal would be catastrophic. Raising rates aggressively would crush government finances, collapse asset markets, expose pension shortfalls. Ending inflation would reveal how dependent the system has become. So the system chooses continuation, roll debt forward, manage expectations, adjust targets. The deal survives because breaking it would break everything else. Historical echoes. History offers no examples of this ending cleanly. Financial repression always lasts longer than expected and ends more abruptly than planned. Not with collapse first, but with denial until confidence snaps. The longer the deal runs, the harder the landing becomes. The question. People ask too late. People often ask, when will this end? That's the wrong question. The better question is, how long can trust survive under quiet extraction? Because once trust is gone, policy stops working. Rates don't matter. Liquidity doesn't matter. Narratives fail, and systems that depend on belief cannot function without it. What this means for the future, the deal will continue until it doesn't. Not because someone decides to stop it, but because it exhausts its own foundation. When savers no longer believe patience is rewarded, the system loses its stabilizer, and when that happens, volatility returns, fast. The final reality. The quiet deal was never about punishing savers, it was about survival. But survival achieved by erosion creates a different kind of fragility, one that doesn't show up in markets immediately, but appears in behavior, trust, and social cohesion. Every system reveals its priorities eventually. This one chose continuity over honesty, stability over preservation, delay over reform, and it paid for that choice with the silent consent of savers. If you want to understand money not as advice, but as a record of decisions and trade-offs, subscribe to Wheelixen, because the most important financial costs are the ones never listed on a bill.